Hello and welcome to Fit and Proper Non-Financial Risk Management. I don't know if I'm fit or he's proper, but anyway, this is the Battleground Chats presents Fit and Proper Non-Financial Risk Management with me, Joe McDavitt, and him,
Paul Minter.
So, Paul and I have known each other for about 20 years or so, working together recently here at Battleground, helping a lot of our clients around non-financial risk. And what we thought was, hey, lots of other people might want to hear our thoughts on non-financial risk management, GRC, CPS 230, resilience, all those sorts of things. Really an opportunity to share some of those thoughts across the group. And this is our introductory podcast, our first foray into those chats. So really what we wanted to do today was just introduce ourselves, maybe talk a bit about the way we think. So maybe instead of asking you to introduce yourself, Paul, what I might do is actually ask you a question, and you can use that sort of as the framing for the introduction.
Go for it, Joe.
So look, you're a former regulator. You've joined Battleground from APRA recently, and now you're advising entities. What's the one thing that you wish management, both risk management and operational leadership at regulated entities knew or were aware of?
That's a great one. So let's simplify it a bit. So the COO and the CRO, often aware of one another, often kind of adversaries, I'd say, though. I've not seen many that are natural friends. And one of my lessons seen in my time at APRA was that adversity typically comes from a risk framework that doesn't quite give the COO what he or she needs. Yeah. But COOs, being who they are, being the conscientious, well-minded people they are charged with understanding the operations of their business and making sure everything works, which is very, very similar to having a risk oversight, but without a framework, without a risk framework providing them with all the information they need. They go ahead and put in 150 hours a week trying to get the information they need. So what do I mean by that? They attend every incident forum. They attend every vendor meeting. They attend every resilience test. They're attending every element of the operations framework to backfill for the fact they're not receiving the operational information from the risk world they need.
So it's really interesting you say that. I remember one of the things I did before joining Battleground was I led an AML uplift program at an organization that shall remain nameless. And that COO-CRO relationship was the biggest struggle I actually had in managing that piece of work. The way in which I described it in my weaker moments was I felt like I was the builder managing a renovation for a couple going through a divorce. Because it was just, but those different points, I mean, they ultimately both wanted the same thing. But the ways in which they thought about how to get there, really differed and really were quite across odds. And I think, from that regulatory perspective that you bring, how do you think that sort of they can build those bridges?
I've got a very biased answer there. And being the author of CPS 230, my natural reflex is to say, well, it's actually in CPS 230. It is the piece of legislation that formally joins risk and resilience. So the CRO and the COO together joined at the hip. But to pick up what you're saying, they both want the same thing. It's true. They're both there for the success of the company. And what I'd like to highlight is that they want the same thing. But what the time at the regulator showed me is that the CRO and his regulatory team, or her regulatory team, only have that much credibility. And so you have the very well-defined roles in operations: get things done, get it fixed, get it smoother. And then the credibility of the risk team hinges on that ability to provide that information. And when done well, it's a seamless, well-integrated relationship. But without being done well, there's often this kind of, oh God, it's this extra thing I need to do for risk. It's this extra thing I need to do for compliance. So I'd really like to help build that bridge. And credibility is the bridge between the two.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting. So from my perspective, I remember the first time I read CPS 230, there were a couple of things that really struck me, and I always go back to them, and I always raise them in conversations. The word risk function is not mentioned at all in the standard. There is no mention of the risk function. They have, you could comply with CPS 230 and not have a risk function. it might cause some 220 issues, but hey, that's by the by. And secondly, it really is a plan, do, check, act cycle for the most important things you do as an organization. So I think really bring it back to those key points. You're really super important. So look, I think Paul, any questions for me? Anything that you want to use for me as a frame to introduce myself with?
Sure. So you mentioned a deep AML background, which is one particular area of compliance, which is a particular area of themselves. What are the kind of universal principles? What are the takeaways that can apply everywhere from that deep expertise background?
Yeah, look, so the AML example is really interesting because fundamentally, AML as an example, it's just about controls. It's about data and controls. It's about, understanding at its most, simple piece, who is my customer? Are they more or less likely to be dodgy or doing dodgy things and using my bank or my financial institution to support those dodgy things? And if they do those dodgy things, can I find out quickly and tell the right people? All of that is about data and controls and understanding how things work. And I think if I go back to those universal truths or the critical elements, it is you don't manage risks, you manage controls. The things you do in an organization, and it's really funny. I was on a call with a GRC systems analyst yesterday, and we were nerding out because we're even beyond you and me nerding out. We were talking about the difference between the requirements of ISO 31000 and the relative importance of understand the context versus understand the objectives. That was deep cuts. Because what we were talking about was, I think there's so much focus in risk management on understanding the objectives, because it's the first thing in ISO 31K, and it says risk is the effect of uncertainty on objectives. I get it, 100%, don't disagree. I think we under-index on understanding the context. What are the people? How do they think and feel? Like, are they happy in their jobs? Are they pissed off? Are they, where are they at? Are they capable? What are the processes? Are they effective? Are they refreshed? Do they align with systems? Technology. Is it new? Is it old? Does it help people do their jobs? Third parties, service providers. And yet, okay, there's a whole bunch of stuff about having the right contract in place and all that sort of stuff. But again, we run a lot of crisis simulations, a lot of work with our clients. We were at a simulation last week with a big organization who outsourced a really critical function to a third party. They don't outsource the risk, yet still within the executive team, they were talking about third party blame. So I think the lever that I would be talking about organizations pulling to better manage risk is their understanding and their recording and their articulation of the context, as well as the objectives. But the more that we can understand that, I think the better and more effective we can be around managing non-financial risk.
Nice.
So as a bit of a follow-up, I just want to ask a tough question. Why is non-financial risk so hard?
I think that's an easy question.
Okay.
Although I've been challenged on it recently. So I'd say the counterpoint is it's an easy question because the answer is simple. It is harder than financial risk because in financial risk, you have dollars and cents to reconcile back to. And everybody intuitively understands dollars and cents because we were taught it from the age of 5 onwards. And you add 100 cents up, you get $1. And if the number's going up, it's good. If the number's going down, it's bad. In non-financial risk, there's no hard reconciling item. So you've got something that is considered more risky than another, or you have something that is late, but it's less late than another thing. And therefore, because you can't determine your expectations in such black and white dollars and cents, you therefore struggle to determine whether I'm going well or not going so well against that. It becomes fuzzy. So that's why it's harder. That doesn't make it better.
Yeah. I mean, I'm going to play the other angle, which is quantify everything. I'm going to go the full quant route here.
Okay. Yep.
Why wouldn't you quantify everything? Operational delays can be put into time. Time is money. Why wouldn't you quant everything?
Because I think it's a false god. I think a lot of the quantification is boiled away to a bit of a thumb suck. So I'd spent a lot of time writing scenarios in one of my old roles, and that was for an operational risk capital calculation. So it goes into RWAs, it goes into core tier one, who's at a bank, and so it gets buried very deeply. How much of the assumption was there? So if I sat in a scenarios workshop and I said, please can you tell me the 95th percentile dollar loss amount? It's like, wow, that's one every 20 years. I've been working for about 20 years. The worst one I've seen is, picking an AML example, was Westpac. It's okay, I've got my 95. All right, so that's great. Now give me 1 in 1,000 year. Like, Christ, 1 in 1,000 year. Well, I mean, Jesus Christ, it was only 2,000 years ago. So, even though you have the framework to be as best you can with your estimates, they're ultimately still estimates. So I understand that quantification is helpful, but I think we've got to all reflect on there is no silver bullet.
Yeah.
Counter to that, I understand there's a big argument out there in non-financial risk land of heat maps are useless, quantification is everything. And then there's a counter, which is quantification is useless and heat maps are everything. I'm going to be very diplomatic and say the answer lies somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, and I think, Paul, one of the phrases that I say often and is use appropriate methods. Ultimately, it's up to the people solving the problem to use appropriate methods to solve the problem. Sometimes that is a hammer, sometimes that is a buzzsaw, sometimes that's a heat map, sometimes that's a Monte Carlo, sometimes it's a bow tie. I think if you slavishly follow anything, and I think that's one of our really critical pieces of our philosophy, is that we need to use appropriate methods. And I sort of wanted to close the conversation on one of the conversation, one of the key points that we sort of spoke about as we were sort of delving through this sort of podcast idea. And I remember we had a conversation about proper risk management, and it sort of gave us a bit of the title. Maybe sort of proper risk management. In a minute or so, what does it mean to you?
More than risk administration, but without getting rid of risk administration. So a lot of people I see, and this talks to the credibility point I made at the start, a lot of people and companies drown in risk administration. So chasing people for overdue actions, making sure things are logged and documented properly, getting the policy refreshes done. They are all absolutely necessary, but not sufficient for proper risk management. They, unfortunately, are the drudgery that is the ticket to play. They're the table stakes, if you will. And real risk management, proper risk management comes beyond that. So I've done my basic hygiene. I've got my easy but time-consuming bits done for me. Hopefully AI can do away with a lot of it. And then it is the value add, it's the human, it's the forward-looking insights, it's the ability to predict and control to that. That is the value add of real proper risk management.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I just want to close this conversation on a crisis exercise. So one of the things we do at Battleground, some of you may not know this, is we run crisis simulations with our clients. And we ran a simulation with a superannuation fund a couple of weeks back around ransomware. Okay, ho-hum, ransomware sim. But what was really interesting in the decision making, that it was a board level decision. And they had to bring together both the checklist mentality and the checklist manifesto. Have the insurers signed off? Have we got, the legals? Was it a sanctioned entity? All that sort of stuff, all that sort of checklist stuff. But then they actually had to run through a filter of, does this align with our values as an organization? What's the actual best outcome for the organization? And it was that subjective and sort of checklist and subjective decision making at the same time. And I think that's, to really sort of summarize what you were saying there, Paul, that's proper risk management. You can't have one without the other. You can't just use a heat map. You can't just use a Monte Carlo. You've got to actually play heads up, think about the situation, and make good decisions based on that. And that really, from our perspective, is the fundamental of fit and proper risk management. And look, we'd love to explore some further subjects as we go through in this podcast. Great to get some feedback, but just want to say thank you so much for listening in to step one, and we'll carry on from there. Paul, appreciate it, mate.